Hi, Asahi here. This is my recap for the anime The Strongest Magician in the Demon Lord's Army. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. In the dim light of a dusty library, a girl picks up a book that tells the story of a sorcerer named Ike who served in the army of the Demon Lord and was the grandson of Romberg, the master sorcerer. As one of the leaders among those hordes of orcs and monstrous creatures, alongside his assistant Jiron, Ike would charge into enemies with fierce resolve, while hiding a secret from the demons that could cost him not only his prestige as commander of the Immortal Brigade, but also his very life. Inside one of the castles captured by the 7th Battalion, a human commander receives the bitter visit of Ike in his quarters. Facing the defeated human, Ike presents three options. The first is to surrender and hand over all his territory. The second is to die by his own hand in an act of honor. Lastly, the commander can flee through the window while the demon pretends to admire the scene of annihilation outside. Ironically, the human thanks his enemy for the mercy, but states that none of the options are sufficient for him. As expected, the man attacks the opposing leader, who retaliates with a single spell that ends the battle. Ike then orders Jiron to tend to the defeated commander's wounds, as well as those of his soldiers who surrendered. Observing the war from afar through a magical sphere, a sorceress notes that it took only a week for the brigade to conquer Asahi, an undeniable proof of the commanding talent behind the victory. With his scepter in hand, Ike conjures a magical barrier at the battle's end. Gazing upon the scene of devastation, he cannot help but feel guilty for wounding so many people, knowing he will never get used to the blood and violence of war. After all, Ike was never a demon, but shares the race targeted by his brutal offensives, human. His teacher Romberg was a great sorcerer with vast wisdom, who understood everything about the advanced civilization that once thrived in this world. On a whim, he decided to take in and raise Ike, a human child, and taught him all his knowledge and magic. In his last words, the sage asked Ike never to speak of the lost civilization, as such a revelation would one day bring countless disasters. As a burden to keep this secret, Ike could never remove the cloak and mask he must wear to hide his true identity, for Romberg knew the Demon Lord would never forgive Ike's humanity. Years later, after conquering Asahi, Ike surrounds the room with a powerful barrier, granting him control over who could enter. At least that was the plan. Hi, Asahi here. This is my recap for the anime The Strongest Magician in the Demon Lord's Army. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. Than the powerful enemy sorcerer. After 20 years of keeping his secret, Ike had been discovered by a hapless human who had knocked herself out on the desk. Later, walking among the ruined halls of that civilization, Jiron fears that too many humans have been left alive. In his defense, Ike argues that a dead man cannot pay taxes, nor can he keep the machinery of Asahi running, a city renowned for its highly developed commerce. Speaking of which, a little further along, surrendered residents want to know how much they owe in taxes to the Demon Lord. To the workers' delight, the sorcerer informs them that the rate will remain the same, but warns that anyone who resists this demand will be punished exemplarily. Suddenly, Ike is summoned without his consent to a chamber where a gigantic golem attacks him. Realizing what's happening, the sorcerer comments to his commander that she promised not to teleport him without warning. Ignoring her subordinate, the mage watches the confrontation in silence. Not taking it lightly, Ike wields his scepter to unleash the slashing attack against the enemy, destroying the golem. Having done this, his superior recalls the little boy who used to hide behind his grandfather, the master sorcerer Romberg. Now Ike was strong enough to defeat a creature she believed could rival him. However, Zephyr, the commander of the 7th Battalion, not only understood the current power of the mage, but was also the only demon who knew his secret. As flamboyant as ever, she informs Ike that Darakutan wishes to see him personally, making him the first brigade leader to receive such an honor. Thus, she will take him to the Demon Lord's castle immediately. Meanwhile, the maid wakes up after fainting from the blow to her head. Not understanding what is happening, she is prevented from leaving the room by the magical barrier, so she turns her eyes back to the room until she finds a portion of food with a note. The message asks the girl to eat and keep quiet, which she does not comprehend at first, but hunger makes her devour the food. Returning to Ike standing before that castle surrounded by miasma, the dark mass affects the human's body, as it always has, regardless of how many years he has been in contact with every corner of the demon territory. As if that weren't enough this time, he would undergo an evaluation to meet the Demon Lord, which could reveal his true identity. However, to prevent this, Zephyr casts a spell spell that promises to maintain the man's disguise. Then, before the commander responsible for inspecting the castle, Ike exudes extraordinary power, prompting the inspector to comment that he expected nothing less from Romberg's grandson. With this, Ike gains access to Doberberg, the demon lord's enormous castle, built to express the vast influence and power of the lord. The corridors are vast and endless, giving the human mage the impression that the supreme leader's importance is just as immense. However, the clear disadvantage of this extensive path is the fact that it tires humans like Ike, who envies his commander's flying ability as she glides through the fortress's corridors without feeling the weight of her steps. Even though he can use this spell, Ike does not control it, as well as Zephyr managing only to leap to great heights instead of gracefully floating without tiring his legs in long walks like the demon does. So after some time, the commander of the Immortal Brigade finally arrives in the throne room of the current demon lord. At the forefront of the hordes, Derakuten was responsible for turning the tide of war against humanity with just one battle, and this reputation makes both enemies and allies fear the coldness and cruelty of this demon, known for executing anyone he considers incompetent, even if they are on his side in the trenches of conflict. On the other hand, Derakuten knows how to best use those who show real talent, and this ability is the hallmark that ensured the demon lord a true revolution in combat methods during his reign. After all, monsters are born and grow up being extremely individualistic, which has always led to endless disputes among them throughout history. However, Derakuten turned the tables by instilling a sense of unity in his troops never seen before, and Ike is about to understand the reason behind this invaluable reputation of the leader. Thus, he bows before the Dark Lord, a young girl who surprises the commander with an appearance that gives an impression of a certain fragility. Derakuten mentions the conquest of the powerful fortress city of Arsenal in just 1 week, and Ike gives all the credit to his superior Saphiro, prompting Derakuten to remark that such humility sounds almost human. This comment sends a chill down the man's spine, so his commander steps in to clarify that she brought the grandson of Romberg, whom everyone called the Guardian of Hell. This information calms the accusatory tone of the demon lord, who understands that this young man's modesty must have come from his grandfather. Speaking of modesty, the Dark Lord emphasizes that Arsenal was taken with almost no loss of life, making Ike think he should have listened to Jiron about killing some prisoners. He quickly considers the best response to justify the lack of bloodshed in the fortress city's battle, arguing that humans may fear terror, but they will never obey it, and history itself proves this. When comparing the productivity of cities where the leaders were executed with those where they remained active, the better approach becomes clear. Without moving a muscle in his face during this speech, Derakuten asks if this is how Romberg thought, which his grandson confirms. With that said, even though he has exchanged few words with the demon lord, Ike has a strange certainty that she knows ancient civilization just like his master, because only knowledge of this level could revolutionize the demon army. Next, Derakuten approaches the servant and considers him different from the other demons who have bloodlust in their eyes. Therefore, next time the Dark Lord wants to look directly at the commander's face to know what kind of thirst this eccentric sorcerer hides behind the mask. With that said, she leaves the throne room. Thus, the human feels brutally relieved, sensing that he could be discovered at any moment, and removes the mask to take a deep breath. With a smile on her face, Saphiro comments that it's not like the man to seem so tense, and he responds that the Lord knew it was a mask, which made him fear immediately. Regardless, his commander reminds him that the human's identity remains preserved, and that's what matters. She informs him that Derakuten gave Ike a reward, which could be seen as a punishment depending on the point of view. Following that, he teleports back to the commander's room in Arsenal, where the portion of food he had left had been devoured by the maid, who slept like a log after eating. Ike kicks the chair where the girl was napping, waking her up with the same fear as last time, pleading not to be killed. Then Ike calms the girl down, saying he won't kill her, and asks for her name to break the ice. The maid says her name is 13, which the mage finds peculiar. However, she explains that servants are called by numbers, and her birth name is Sadie, like that French classical pianist. Some people confuse it with 7, which is not not her number, but the correct pronunciation is Satie, which is not a number at all and sounds much fancier. Regardless, Ike spares the poor girl by making her his servant. In the next scene, the mage is congratulated by Jiron for becoming the Lord of Avelias, the land at the southernmost border of Arsenom. According to Saphiro earlier, this is the demon lord's gift to the victorious commander, who now has the opportunity to be on the front line against humans. And since Ike is a lover of taxes, the supreme leader demands that the officer double the tax revenue in the region that sits in the eye of the hurricane in the middle of a war. Curiously, it was the demons who devastated this god-forsaken territory, and now Ike will have to figure out how to rebuild the small town of Avelias, which would take about 6 months, since the place is on the border and will be the target of frequent attacks the population, and the army already begin to feel the influence of the new ruler, who orders humans and demons to work together to rebuild the structures, which would reduce the reconstruction time to just 1 month. Jiron despises the fact that he has to cooperate with this race, especially since the men receive overtime as an incentive. However, the orc acknowledges that his commander's methods are strange, but they earn the title of ruler for the mage, who also gets his hands dirty alongside the workers and is already being recognized by all the local people. In fact, on further reflection, Jiron praises Ike so much that he sees the sorcerer as the future demon lord himself.